The lawyer hadn't said a word yet, and my parents were already watching the room, not grieving, watching, like this moment belonged to them, like whatever was about to be read was already decided, and everyone else was just there to witness it. The silence felt managed, chairs placed too neatly, people standing where they'd been directed, eyes shifting toward my parents instead of the portrait behind the table. Even before the will was opened, the power balance was obvious. This wasn't just my grandfather's funeral. It was a performance they were confident would go their way. Someone had moved the portrait slightly off-center. I noticed because my mother never allows that, which meant she'd allowed it today, for a reason. That's when I realized this wasn't accidental. The room had been arranged, just like everything else in our family always was. My father stood beside the lawyer, close enough to intervene without making it obvious. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He'd already placed me where I belonged, near the back, out of the way, present but irrelevant. No one asked where I wanted to sit. No one asked if I wanted to speak. The order had already been printed, names stacked carefully, predictably. My sibling's name appeared before mine, again. No explanation offered, none expected. People glanced at me with polite interest. Not sympathy, recognition, like they'd already heard something about me and were checking if it matched. I stayed still. I've learned that reacting too early only helps them control the story. The lawyer straightened the papers. My mother gave a single nod, small, quiet, final. That's when it became clear. Whatever was written there had already been discussed. Just not with me. I told myself it didn't matter, that names on paper don't change reality, that I'd survived worse than this. But as the lawyer took a breath to begin, I realized something that made my chest tighten. The name he was about to read wasn't the one my parents had told everyone to expect, and suddenly I understood why they were standing so close. The lawyer cleared his throat, but before he spoke, my father leaned in just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice. Enough for the lawyer to pause. That pause told me everything. This wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. The reading started the way everyone expected. Formal language, gratitude, a summary of a life well lived. Heads nodded at the right moments. My mother folded her hands, calm, composed, already preparing for the part she believed would confirm everything she'd been telling people for weeks. I kept my eyes on the paper in the lawyer's hands, not on my parents. I didn't want them to see me watching. I didn't want them adjusting in real time. They're good at that, changing direction without appearing to move. My sibling's name came up first, exactly where it always does. A small inheritance, sentimental items, safe choices, things that wouldn't raise questions. My mother exhaled, barely noticeable, like a step in a routine she'd rehearsed. Then the lawyer paused again. He adjusted his glasses, turned a page. The sound was louder than it should have been in that quiet room. That's when I felt it. The shift. Not dramatic, subtle, like a wrong note in a familiar song. My father straightened, not in anger, in alertness, because the next line didn't follow the order they'd set. It didn't skip me, and it didn't say what they'd told everyone it would. The lawyer hesitated, just for a second, as if confirming he was allowed to continue. No one stopped him. No one could, without drawing attention. That's when my mother finally looked at me, not with anger, with calculation. And I understood something then that I hadn't before. Whatever came next wasn't just unexpected, it was dangerous to them. The lawyer read the next section carefully, slower than before, like every word carried weight he hadn't expected. The room stayed still, but the silence changed. People stopped leaning back. A few shifted forward without realizing it. This part wasn't about money, not directly. It was about conditions, about timing, about decisions made years earlier that were never meant to be spoken aloud. My father's jaw tightened, just enough for me to notice. My mother didn't move at all. That scared me more. The lawyer mentioned a document attached to the will, an addendum, dated much later than the original. I saw my father's hand twitch, then settle back on his knee. He'd lost control of the pace, and he hated that more than anything. My sibling glanced at my parents, confused now. This wasn't the version they'd been repeating. This wasn't the story we'd all been trained to accept. I didn't look at them. I kept my face neutral, calm, exactly what my parents taught me to do when something went wrong. The lawyer explained that the addendum existed because of concerns. That word landed hard. Concerns about influence, about pressure, about decisions made on behalf of someone else. My mother finally blinked. I remembered then how insistent they'd been about handling everything themselves, how they'd said it was easier this way, cleaner, how they'd warned me not to complicate things by asking questions. The lawyer reached the final line of the addendum and paused again, longer this time, like he understood what was about to happen to the room once he spoke. I realized then that this wasn't an accident. Someone had planned this moment, and they hadn't told my parents. When the lawyer continued, his voice stayed professional, but the words stopped sounding neutral. He explained that the addendum wasn't written in a rush. It had been reviewed, notarized, and filed separately on purpose. That detail mattered more than the contents themselves. It meant forethought. It meant intent. My father leaned forward for the first time. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. He was trying to reclaim the moment, trying to read the room the way he always did when things slipped. My mother kept her eyes on the lawyer, her posture stiff, like movement itself might make this worse. The addendum didn't accuse anyone directly. It didn't need to. It outlined safeguards, restrictions, instructions about how assets were to be distributed if there was evidence of pressure or misrepresentation in the final years. The lawyer didn't say my parents' names. He didn't have to. I felt my siblings stiffen beside them. This wasn't what they'd been promised. Their confidence drained quickly, replaced by something close to panic. They glanced at me, searching for a reaction, maybe a crack they could use later. I gave them nothing. The lawyer explained that because of the addendum, certain transfers were delayed, temporarily frozen, pending review. That single phrase changed everything. My father finally looked at me then, not angry, not accusing, just calculating. He was trying to figure out how much I knew. I thought about the quiet visits near the end, the conversations no one else bothered to have. The way certain questions had been asked carefully, almost indirectly. I'd assumed it was just age, just caution. I understood now it was preparation. The lawyer closed the folder halfway, as if to signal the worst wasn't over yet. He said the final distribution would depend on whether the conditions outlined in the addendum were met. That process would take time, weeks, maybe months. No one spoke. No one rushed to comfort anyone else. The room felt suspended, like it was waiting for permission to breathe again. I realized then that my parents weren't afraid of losing money. They were afraid of losing control. The lawyer gathered his papers slowly, not rushing, not offering reassurance, as if speed itself might invite questions he didn't intend to answer yet. He reminded everyone that further communication would happen privately and through proper channels, then stepped back, leaving the family to sit with what had just happened. That silence felt heavier than anything he'd read aloud. My mother was the first to move. She didn't look at me. She adjusted her coat, smoothed the fabric at her sleeve, and whispered something to my father that I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, it didn't calm him. His jaw tightened, and I could see him mentally running through conversations, favors, phone calls, anything that might still put this back under his control. My sibling tried a different approach. They forced a laugh that landed wrong and said something about paperwork always being more complicated than it needed to be. It was an attempt to minimize what had just occurred, to turn it back into a temporary inconvenience. No one responded. Even they seemed to realize the words didn't work once they were out. My wife leaned slightly toward me then, close enough that only I could hear her. She didn't ask questions or offer advice. She just said that whatever came next, we didn't have to explain ourselves to anyone. That mattered more than she probably knew. It was the first moment that felt solid since the reading began. The older relative, who had been quiet the entire time, finally stood. They didn't confront anyone. They didn't defend me openly. They simply thanked the lawyer and mentioned, almost casually, that this outcome made sense given the conversations that had happened near the end. My parents froze. That comment lingered, unanswered, but loud enough to change how the room understood the past. As people slowly began to leave, the space between us widened naturally. There were no arguments, no dramatic exits, just distance settling in where authority used to be. My father didn't try to stop me. My mother didn't ask me to stay. They both knew that whatever leverage they thought they had was no longer guaranteed. As we walked out, I realized something quietly important. This wasn't victory. It wasn't closure. It was uncertainty replacing certainty. And for the first time, that uncertainty didn't belong to me. The consequences hadn't fully arrived yet, but they were already moving. The weeks that followed didn't bring confrontation. They brought distance. Phone calls stopped first, then messages became formal, careful, as if every word was being archived for later use. My parents spoke through intermediaries when they had to. My siblings stopped pretending we were still on the same side. Whatever role they thought they were playing before, it no longer worked. The truth is, once control is challenged, it doesn't disappear loudly. It erodes, slowly, quietly. I could feel it in the way my father hesitated before speaking, in how my mother asked questions instead of giving instructions. They weren't powerless, but they were no longer certain. And certainty had always been their strongest weapon. There were attempts to rewrite the story, hints dropped to relatives, carefully worded explanations about misunderstandings and intentions. But something had shifted at the funeral that couldn't be undone. Too many people had heard the same words. Too many had seen the same reactions. The narrative no longer belonged to one household. The older family member who had stayed quiet reached out once, not to congratulate me, not to comfort me, just to say that the silence had ended exactly when it needed to. Nothing more, nothing less. That message mattered more than any apology would have. My wife and I made decisions without consulting anyone else. Small ones at first, then larger ones, where we spent time, who we trusted, what we kept private. Every choice felt like reclaiming something that had never fully been ours before. Not out of rebellion, but out of necessity. I don't know what my parents tell themselves now. I don't know what my sibling believes about their role in all of this. What I do know is that the balance they depended on no longer exists. Control requires certainty, and certainty requires silence. They lost both, not because I fought them, but because for once I didn't need to.